So next, we will be hearing from a ChainSafer. We'll be hearing from Amer Ameen, who is our VP of Project Management. He's going to be speaking to us about active listening. And so specifically, his talk is entitled The Unsung Leadership Skill Developed by Hostage Negotiators and Suicide Hotlines, Active Listening. So Amer should be joining us in just a moment.
All right, can you hear me?
Perfectly. Thank you so much, Amer. I'll let you get to it.
Let me just share my screen. As Stu said, my talk is titled The Unsung Leadership Skill Developed by Hostage Negotiators and Suicide Hotlines, Active Listening. And you may be wondering why this topic. We're at a blockchain event, but I'm talking about listening. There are so many interesting blockchain talks that I could give about all the cool work that we've done and so many lessons that have been learned along the way. But when I was pondering topics for today, I wanted to share this more than anything. When reflecting, I realized that this practice of listening has had the most profound impact on my work and life. I mean, communication underlies everything we do. In the book, Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari talks about how we conquer the world. Communication was how we did it. Specifically, language was the unpredictable spark that started our ascent up the food chain. It's a foundational skill. It's like learning how to run before practicing free kicks for soccer. It's really hard to be a great soccer player if you don't know how to run well. And it's really hard to be a great leader if you don't know how to communicate well. And so, from a young age, we're taught to read, write, and speak. However, we're never taught to listen. So we're blind to it. The vast majority of us are illiterate when it comes to listening, even though, in my opinion, it's more than 50% of verbal communication. And as a result, we also fail to recognize it as the art that it is. We know the prolific poets, novelists, and speakers of our time, but who are the prolific listeners? They are just as powerful. And that's why I call this the unsung skill. Active listening also just happens to be the key skill for hostage negotiation and suicide hotline responders. This is how those critical responders are trained. And these same skills have helped transform me into a better leader and colleague. Whether it's one-on-ones, retrospectives, client calls, sales, any discussion around decision-making or conflict resolution, each critical conversation that you have lays a brick on the path to your team's destiny. Like any great art, I can't teach you everything in 30 minutes. I'm still learning too. My hope is simply to inspire you. And so, I'll be telling you more about like what active listening is and how to do it. But before that, I'd love to tell you more about how I even came to care about this. And so I'll tell you a little bit about my story. In my day job, I lead PMs at ChainSafe. And in my free time, I volunteer at a suicide hotline in Toronto. I wasn't always great at listening, and I didn't always have a fulfilling career. There was significant struggle that led to this growth, namely a heartbreaking experience with mental health over 8 years ago in October of 2012. Before this experience, I thought I knew what mental illness was. I had heard the terms depression, suicide, schizophrenia, bipolar before. And this experience that I'm sharing revolves around my brother from another mother. We grew up together and literally have the same name, Amer. Although there were obvious signs of mental fragility, we were oblivious to the underlying disease. We planned a big party night, what some may call a rave, which is now memorable for all the wrong reasons. After this night, full of stimulation, he went back to university. His friends called a few days later to let us know that something was wrong. The next time we met is burned into my memory. It was like I was looking at a completely different person. The familiarity that was built over a lifetime felt like it was gone. He hadn't eaten or slept for days. His demeanor resembled an insane person from a movie. I was haunted by the fact that this night of partying could have caused this. He ended up in the ICU of a psychiatric ward, and he was there for over 40 days. We had no idea what was going on, if he would ever be the same again. I feel like this experience is when I truly grew up. Visiting almost every day, seeing what I saw, was a pivotal experience in my life. He ended up being diagnosed with bipolar and has struggled with manic and depressive episodes ever since, in and out of the hospital. By experiencing firsthand the ripples of pain and suffering that mental illness causes, from the individual themselves to loved ones to society, my perspectives on life, what I valued, everything changed. Fast forward to 2017, I'm working at a bank and suddenly I get laid off. At the age of 30, I felt like I hadn't achieved any success in my career. For someone who was always the smart kid, this was a huge shot to my ego. I thought perhaps I wasn't cut out for typical success in society. This started a journey of self-discovery, which eventually led me to blockchain and this incredible organization. As a part of this journey, I read Never Split the Difference, and this book changed my life. It's written by a hostage negotiator, Chris Voss, and he said the listening skills that he built while volunteering at a suicide hotline became the foundation for his prolific career as a hostage negotiator. And this inspired me to start volunteering at a suicide hotline, to build these skills and to give back to society in a way that was very meaningful to me, especially given everything that I've just shared. I happened to start working at ChainSafe and volunteering the exact same week. I had never worked in blockchain or as a PM, and it was a career change for me, a complete fresh start. Now I'm leading PMs at ChainSafe, a dream job for me, not only building cutting-edge technology, but also building an incredible organization with people that I consider family. Best of all, I feel greatly appreciated by my colleagues and this community. And I attribute a lot of my success and the change in my life to active listening. And that's why I'm here sharing it with you today. I will share with you the fundamentals and 2 techniques for active listening that you can use starting right after this talk. But first, let's start with a little exercise. So if you have a pen or paper, feel free to write stuff down or just mentally take a note. Usually when I do this, it's been interactive, so we'll try it a little differently. So let's look at a couple examples. How would you respond to these statements? And don't overthink it. I mean, when we're normally responding, we just go with our gut response. So just go with that. The first one is, I don't want an HIV test. I don't want to know if I have AIDS. If there is nothing I can do about it, what is the point in knowing? So take a second and think about how you would respond to this. And the second example is, I can't believe that you spend all this time on Twitter instead of cleaning up our home. I don't care if ETH2 is launching. Can you please get your life together? And yeah, take some time, think about how you'd respond to that. Maybe write it down or take a mental note. All right, so let's talk about some active listening fundamentals. And so what exactly is active listening? And I like to use this term that I'm sure, or phrase that people have probably heard before, which is listening to respond versus listening to listen. And like an analogy that I like to use is listening to respond is almost like a fist fight. You're looking for your opportunity to do what you need to do, land a punch. It feels often very adversarial. Versus listening to listen is more like being in a dance. It feels more collaborative. You are watching for their step and moving accordingly. And so like these are 2 very, very different situations that feel very different. And that's how I would describe active listening versus what we normally do. So when you're listening to listen, it means that your priority is understanding. This means that you focus all of your attention on the speaker and consciously try to understand their message. Again, like this is a very important part. It's all about understanding, and it's about consciously doing your best to try and understand their message. And so this means that any response that you give, anything that you say, everything is very, very intentional to further understanding of what this person is trying to say. And the biggest pitfalls that we usually have to this is our own ego, any judgments that we may have about a situation, anything that we want to happen, or anything that we don't want to happen. These are most commonly what gets in the way of actually listening. And it's very important to suspend our own judgments, beliefs, desires, and fears so that we can be present, open, allowing, and protective of what another person needs in each moment, and to be able to listen to them. And the first step is to physically communicate that you're listening. And so although this sounds really, really basic, you'd be surprised how often we don't do this, how often we're looking at our phone, how often even in a Zoom call, we're doing something else at the same time. I know I'm guilty of this. And so this is the first step, is just physically communicating your listening with eye contact, maintaining a soft and steady gaze, and body language, remaining relaxed and attentive, and just exuding comfort so that you can help them feel more comfortable. And then nodding. If it's a video call or in person, we can physically nod to acknowledge that we're listening. After all, when we are listening, they'll be doing 95% of the talking. If it's on the phone, you can use verbal nodding. Things like, okay, and just keep acknowledging that you're actually listening. And then another important thing is how you're speaking, and specifically your voice, the tone of voice, your volume, and your pace. You want to radiate warmth, care, and acceptance, sort of like a meditation teacher. And so tone, volume, and pace of voice are very important. Another important thing is you want to match their mood with your voice. And this is what creates connection. If someone comes to you and they're really sad and they're like, oh, my dog just died, you don't want to be all excited and, oh, hey, I can't believe that happened. You want to match their voice and say, oh, I'm sorry that happened. Is there anything I can do to help? And so these are some basic, super, super basic things that actually go a long way when it comes to listening. And so let's actually jump into techniques. I'll cover 2 specific techniques that you can use that are, very simple, but very, very powerful. And the first one is called labeling. And I have coined this the X-ray technique. Don't try Googling that. You won't find anything. I just wanted to find a way to represent this so that it would be easy to remember. And the reason that I call this the X-ray technique is because we need to look beneath the surface, beyond what is just said. And in order to do this, it's important to acknowledge that there's many layers to communication. There's what is literally being said, and then there's what they're feeling or emotions that actually drive what they're saying. And there could be many, many layers to this. And in order to do this, we actually need to be able to understand emotions quite better than I think most people do. And so that's why I'm sharing this with you. It's an emotional wheel. And basically in the middle, you'll find things that are very commonly used as emotions. And then towards the outside, you'll see more nuanced emotions that maybe aren't always commonly used. And the reason why this is so important is because language actually determines what we see and how we perceive the world. In the Inuit language, they have 5 different words for snow, whereas when we see snow, we just see snow and most people aren't happy. But as language can determine how we see the world, language can also determine how we perceive our feelings or even how we feel. And so often we aren't even really aware of the nuances to our feelings. And to be a good listener, we can help other people see the feelings that maybe they don't even see themselves. And so what is labeling, or what is this X-ray technique? So it's simply statements that acknowledge and validate their feelings. And these statements are important because they demonstrate that you're actually listening, that you're paying attention, you're trying to understand and figure things out, that you care about their experience, and that it's also okay and acceptable for them to feel the way that they do. Often people aren't even really aware of what they're feeling, and the acknowledgement of what they're feeling can provide deep connection and comfort in itself. And there's really only 3 steps to this. The first step is to detect what they may be feeling. Detecting how someone's feeling takes a lot of attentiveness and emotional intelligence, and it takes a lot of practice, and even then we'll get it wrong a lot of the time. And that's why it's very important to state it like a question, and that's step 2. To detect what they're feeling is step 1, and to put that in words as a question, and using the words "it seems like," or "it sounds like," "it seems like you're feeling sad," or "it sounds like you're frustrated." The reason why it's important to state it like a question is because this subtly shows the intention of understanding. You don't want to suggest you know. Saying "it seems like you're frustrated" is very different from saying "you're frustrated." It's 2 completely different mindsets. And as an active listener, it's very important to be in the mindset of understanding and to communicate that through these subtle things. And the third and very, very important step is silence. This is a huge part of active listening in general and very important for both of the techniques that I'm sharing with you. Silence is important because it gives them time to process and respond to what you're saying. Again, maybe you said something that they're not actually feeling. It seems like you're feeling sad. Well, no, I'm not actually feeling sad. I'm actually feeling kind of tired or whatever, right? But silence is key to allow them to process what you're saying, acknowledge it, compare it to what they're feeling themselves, and respond. And so, definitely very, very important third step. Another important thing I want to mention is that we can actually listen to and support people whose actions we completely disagree with. For example, let's say you're talking to someone who has abused their partner or someone who has sexual feelings for children. While we may not be able to relate to these actions or thoughts, that doesn't mean that we can't listen to them and that we can't connect with them. These are 2 real experiences that I've had many times while volunteering. And the important thing to realize is, although we may not agree with the actions or thoughts, we can connect on the level of emotions, because both these people may be feeling shame or maybe feeling ostracized. And these are things that we have all felt at different times in our life. And we can use these through labeling statements to actually connect with people and make them feel supported. And so just like wrapping this technique up, let's take a look at an example. And so the example is, "I can't believe you didn't call me last night." So what is the underlying emotion here, or emotions? And how could you respond? Something that I see is maybe they're annoyed. So I might say that it seems like you're annoyed with me. But there's potentially other emotions that are even like deeper. Maybe this person is annoyed, but they're actually like on a deep level lonely or insecure. And so that's just a simple example of how you can use labeling or this X-ray technique to become a better listener. The second technique I like to call the mirroring or tennis technique. And the reason I've called it the tennis technique is because the way I look at it is you're simply putting the ball back in their court. And this is a super, super simple and extremely effective technique. So if you take one thing away from this talk at all, let it be this technique, because it is so simple and it is so powerful that the hostage negotiator, Chris Voss, calls this the Jedi mind trick. And so you're not going to believe how simple it really is. All mirroring really is it's a statement that repeats exactly what was just said with an inquisitive tone. Not word for word, but just taking the few critical words. And the reason why this works, in Chris Voss's own words, is mirroring is the art of insinuating similarity, which facilitates bonding. And there's really only 2 steps to this. First, repeat a few critical words with an inquisitive tone. And I'm sure, well, hopefully you can guess the next step, which is silence. Again, give them time to process what was just said and allow them to respond as they would like. And why mirroring is so powerful is because we're literally not injecting our own opinion, our own thoughts, or anything into this conversation. We are just throwing the ball back in their court and allowing them to take the conversation where they would like. And it's just like perfect for allowing people to open up, just giving them permission to just say what's on their mind. And so this is a super, super powerful technique. Again, super easy. There's really not much to it. Let's take a quick look at an example. And so maybe someone says to you, I'm so bummed that Bitcoin is almost at 20K. What are the critical words here, and how could you respond to this? I might say, you're so bummed that Bitcoin is almost at 20K? Yeah, I was planning to buy it like 3 weeks ago, and my friend who owed me money, he didn't pay me back. Your friend didn't pay you back? Yeah, he's owed me money for like a year, and like I don't know how to really ask him for it, and he hasn't paid me back, so on and so forth. And so, you can just keep using this technique. But a warning is that if you use this back to back to back, you will sound like a robot, and maybe they'll think something is up. So make sure to just sprinkle it in with like regular conversation or other listening techniques. And so you're probably at this point thinking, this is super easy. I don't know why there's like this whole talk about it. Like, how hard really is listening? And so I'll talk about some of the common pitfalls that happen or we see that really stop us from being good listeners. The first is something that I've already covered, which is allowing your own judgments, desires, fears, or ego into the conversation. And the reason why I say this first is because this really is the core thing that stops each and every one of us, including myself, on a very regular basis from actually being an effective listener. In any given situation, whether it's a colleague, someone who reports to you, maybe a friend or a partner, we always have our own opinions, things that we want to see happen as a result of this conversation, or maybe that this conversation plays into, things that we don't want to see happen, or even our ego, ways that we want to be perceived by the world. And these things are constantly getting in the way of actually listening. And this leads into a lot of the other pitfalls, but specifically the next one, which blew my mind when I first saw it, because it was like, I do this all the time. And that is trying to solve their problems. And like, even now to this day, I catch myself trying to solve other people's problems when they come to me, and they don't ask me to solve their problems. It's okay to help people solve their problems if that's what they explicitly ask for. But most of the time, people come to you or to us, and they are just expressing something. For example, I've been feeling like I haven't really made any strong connections since I moved to Toronto. A common response I may have given, or maybe still would give, have you checked out this? Have you reached out to this person? Or have you joined a recreational sports team? Or have you gone to this meetup? It's like our initial reaction is always to try and help, which I guess is definitely a good thing, but it's definitely counterproductive to active listening. Unless somebody asks you for like, how do you think I can connect with people more in Toronto? It's not really listening if we start suggesting solutions. And usually we suggest solutions because we're uncomfortable with feelings that are not positive. And we want to be seen as someone helpful. And that's our ego. Another common pitfall is talking a lot. When we're active listening, we should be doing 95% of the talking. There may be situations where it makes sense for you to talk, to share a personal experience, or to help find a solution if that's what makes sense in the conversation, but always question if you're talking a lot, because really when we're active listening, we should be allowing them to do a lot of the talking. And another thing that kind of follows from that is directing the conversation. There are often things that we care about, that we want to hear, that we want to know more about, but really we want to be focusing on what they want to share, what's going on in their mind. And it's very easy to get caught up in kind of asking questions that reveal things that we care about. Another common pitfall is not using open-ended questions and asking like yes or no questions, or questions that are specifics, like what exactly did this person say? While they can play a role in like the greater conversation, they don't really help that much when it comes to listening. It's very important to allow whoever you're listening to, whoever you're talking to to go wherever they want to go, to take the conversation where they want to. And open-ended questions allow them to do that, and not open-ended questions don't really. And so asking questions like, instead of what exactly did they say, why does this matter to you? Or why did that hurt you? Or whatever, and allow them to take the conversation where they would like. Another common pitfall is being uncomfortable with silence. I know that most of us aren't comfortable with silence, and even after practicing active listening for a couple of years now, I'm still incredibly uncomfortable with silence. But it's important to recognize that silence is like laying the red carpet for whoever you're listening to. And the longer the silence, the bigger and grander this red carpet is. There are a lot of things that are hard to say, maybe things that this person has never mentioned to somebody ever in their life. For example, somebody considering suicide. These things don't just come up in conversation. We need to really give people permission to say what's on their mind. And the best way to do this is to be silent. There's times where I've been silent for, 30 seconds or more on a call as I was volunteering. And those are some of the most meaningful moments and when some of the most deepest things come out. And so I highly recommend, being conscious of this and working to become more comfortable with silence. Another common pitfall is using terms like I understand and I know how you feel. While they may be well-intentioned, they can often send the wrong message. We always want to be inquisitive and acknowledging that we really don't actually know what's going on and we're trying to figure it out. And using terms like I understand or I know how you feel might send the opposite message. So now that we've discussed, techniques, the fundamentals, and some common pitfalls, let's take a look at the examples that I showed you at the beginning again. And I asked you at the beginning, how would you listen? And now I'll ask you at the beginning I asked you how you would respond. And now I'll ask you, how would you listen? So take a minute and just reread these. Think about how you would have initially responded, and perhaps your answers would have changed now. So to wrap these up, compared to the beginning of the presentation where I shared those examples and now, I assume most of your answers probably changed just a little bit. And hopefully this illustrates that active listening takes practice. Almost no one is a natural listener. And a reminder that I'm not an expert by any means. These basic concepts have had such a profound impact on my life, and so they can have a profound impact on your life and everyone that you touch. And the key is deliberate practice. These ideas are sort of like floaties, the things you wear on your arms when you're trying to learn how to swim. At first, it's super awkward. You can only really float. You can't really swim, but you keep practicing. You keep trying with these floaties. Eventually, you develop your own style, and you can take these floaties off, and you can swim on your own. And the key to getting there is deliberate practice. And the best way that I've found to get this deliberate practice is to volunteer at a suicide hotline. It's such an incredible win-win, and I promise it will change your life, but also the lives of so many people. And so to finish off, I'd like to state the obvious. Communication plays a very, very important role in our lives. Good communication strengthens us. It's uniting, harmonizing. It feels like love, connection, and warmth. Bad communication weakens us. It creates conflict and disconnect. It feels like coldness and resentment and aloneness. So, communication, it really is not optional. It's always happening. Whether you choose to practice listening or not, your communication will continue to impact your organization and your relationships. As a leader, what you do has incredible leverage. The results of your communication will ripple through the organization and your relationships for better or for worse. And so I hope you choose to listen. I'll leave you with a couple of links. I think it's really hard to actually comprehend everything that I just shared without like seeing it in practice. So in that link, there's a video that has a great example of a masterful listener doing exactly that, and also links to the book that I read, Never Split the Difference, and another book, Nonviolent Communication, that are just absolutely fantastic and, in my opinion, life-changing. And also a link to the slides. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter. This is something I'm super passionate about and happy to help you on your journey, and we can learn together. And finally, if any of this or anything in this conference has resonated with you, and you're a developer or a DevOps engineer, or even if you're a PM, I mean, we just recently hired a PM, but we're always looking for great people. Please do reach out, check out this link, and see our open positions, and come join us. It's an incredible organization, and we'd love to work with you. So yeah, thank you for listening, and I'd love to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amer. That was a very powerful communication technique that often goes overlooked. So definitely good to have a few kind of key takeaways that we could all implement right away as well. But yeah, so there are a couple audience questions for you. First one is, you assess whether or not you are practicing active listening in your everyday life. It's tough to track speech and so.
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually, it is difficult, right? Like it's very difficult. I think there's like a few things. First of all, how are your interactions going in general, right? Like, are they going the way that you would like? Do you feel deeply connected with the people that you are interacting with? Because if the answer is no, or if you feel like it could be more, chances are that the listening could be improved. And so that we're always reflecting on the way things go in our day. If we find ourselves like ruminating about things that happened earlier, chances are we could improve listening. And obviously, just like self-awareness in general is very important in life, and especially with listening. And I think these kind of go hand in hand. And practicing listening helps you become more self-aware. Becoming more self-aware helps you become a better listener. And so, like, working on those and constantly reflecting on, how you're interacting with other people is how you do it. And it's important to acknowledge that nobody's perfect, and it's just something that we're working on always. And so I would say reflecting and just paying attention to the quality of your relationships and interactions.
Yeah, as you mentioned, these aren't intuitive skills necessarily. So just practice and kind of look for small, subtle changes and improvements on. So the next question is, although mutually beneficial, who benefits most from practicing active listening, the individual listening or the person who is speaking to the active listener?
That is a great question. I think, we may think that the person who is being listened to is the one who's benefiting the most. But the truth is, like, what is our goal ultimately? And I think everybody, parties and the entire world, benefits when two people are more deeply connected. And so I believe both people and everybody in the world benefits from like an effective listener. And ultimately, if there are things that you care about, desires, things that you want to see happen, if you listen first, you will be able to get that across, through the conversation. And so I've found that when there's actually something that I want or care about, the best way to get it is actually by listening first, communicating and establishing that you actually understand what this person's stance is, and then talking more about how you feel. And so I think everybody benefits from deeper connection and more understanding.
And so I have one question personally I would like to ask is, what is the most profound impact that active listening has had on your professional development?
I think that's a good question. I think overall, when I started working at ChainSafe, I didn't know. I walked into a situation where there was no practices for project management. There was no expectation for what I would do, rather an impact that I would have. And so to go from this situation where I didn't really have any idea what to do, my primary objective, and it worked out well that I started volunteering the same week I started working at ChainSafe, and all these ideas were fresh in my mind, was to talk to each person one-on-one and really understand what they were looking for, what their biggest problems were, what they needed from me. And then what I did was 100% in response to what each of you told me was going on in your life or at work or whatever. And I've continued that practice. And so what I do in my day-to-day job has very little to do with what I think should be done, but more what I'm noticing around me based on these conversations. And so it's less about me and it's more about everyone else, I would say. And I would say that's a very profound difference from how I've approached any job.
Much more powerful connection that way. Actually, one more audience question. Do you have any introspective insights from project management? Any introspective insights from project management correlates with our understanding of mental health?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what this is asking, but I mean, I'll do my best to answer it. I would say when we're doing project management, we often focus on these processes, like how do we do sprint planning? How do we do, stand up, so on and so forth. There's some really, hardened, strict processes that most companies use. However, processes are nothing without buy-in and without people feeling good and feeling engaged. And that really is a mental health thing, especially with COVID and working remotely and all that. And so I think if we pay only attention to the processes and doing those well, we miss, it may not actually be that effective. Whereas we could have zero processes, but if we are focused on, ensuring that everyone is mentally healthy and engaged, we can achieve a lot together. Obviously, both work together, and you can't, you shouldn't have just one without the other. But I do think that perhaps we don't pay enough attention into mental health, and that if we do, at least I try to, we can actually help elevate our performance and our output.
I couldn't agree more. So thanks again, Amer. This is a fantastic presentation. Thanks for taking the time for being with us. And yeah, it's truly been an honor to kind of watch you grow and progress over the last couple of years within the organization.
Yeah, thank you, Stu. It's been all my pleasure.